Kia ora koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, te wiki o te reo Māori. Warm greetings to you all, and welcome to Talk 2 of the Connect and Develop series, and Day 4 of Māori Language Week. I'm Joel Terwilliger, Alumni Relations Manager at the University of Auckland, and it's my great pleasure to be with you today. If you're tuning in for the first time, thanks for being here. And for those of you that joined us for the last talk, we're glad you're back. The world of work is a quickly changing landscape, and the Connect and Develop series is here to bring you tools that can help you adapt along the way. The topic of today's talk, Getting Financially Fit, Personal Finance Habits for Success, is an important one for us to consider, whether we're thinking about financial sustainability, achieving life goals, or looking ahead to new challenges. Our speaker is Dipra Ray, who among many things is CEO and Managing Director of tech companies mPort and Springday, and was inducted into the university's 40 Under 40 Disruptors and Innovators in 2018. Joining Dipra today is our MC, Liam Sutherland. Liam is studying economics, finance, and law here at the university, and is the Chief Executive Officer of SavY New Zealand, a student-run charitable trust that helps to equip young people with good financial habits, regardless of their background and aspirations. Through his capacity at SavY, Liam works to enhance the financial literacy of New Zealand's youth by providing greater access to information and resources, and supporting volunteer facilitators to run free financial literacy workshops in high schools across Auckland and Wellington. He is also completing an internship with Deloitte New Zealand. Liam is going to share a bit more about our speaker Dipra with us in a moment, and later have a brief discussion with him before circling back to address your questions toward the end. On behalf of all of us here at the university, I'd like to acknowledge Liam and Dipra for being a part of this series. And to all of you joining us, I hope you come away from today's webinar with some valuable insights. Take it away, Liam.
Thanks for that very flattering introduction, Joel. It's great to be here. Before I start introducing Dipra, I just want to cover a few tips for participating in today's webinar. Firstly, the Q&A function at the bottom of your on-screen Zoom panel is live. Please submit your questions at any time. We'll be monitoring them as we go. And I'll also encourage everybody to upvote questions that they like the most. At the end of today's webinar, we will be having a Q&A session with Dipra, and we'll be answering the highest rated questions. And now on to introducing today's speaker, Dipra Ray. Dipra is the CEO and Managing Director of mPort, a tech business building the world's first measurement passport to a healthier and more confident you. He co-founded the business with two of his high school friends from New Zealand. Dipra, also the CEO of an mPort subsidiary, Springday, a digital platform that helps organizations measure and improve the well-being of their people, in turn creating happier, healthier, and more productive employees. Springday works with some of Australia's largest businesses to deliver a digital well-being experience that is second to none. Additionally, Dipra is a director of NexPay, one of Australia's leading international student payment platforms, having co-founded the business in 2012. Lastly, and this is how I know Dipra was involved in starting SavY, where he continues to serve as its chairman. SavY has conducted over 2,000 workshops since it started, which equates to roughly 50,000 students, and is now operating across New Zealand. And so without further ado, over to you, Dipra.
Thank you, Liam. And first of all, thank you to all of you for taking the time to attend this webinar. And thank you for the University of Auckland to ask me to actually participate. Financial literacy is one of my great passions. As Liam and Sid sort of outlined, I helped start SavY 13 years ago, shows my age now, fundamentally because I believe that financial literacy is critical to be able to be successful. I won't spend a huge amount of time today talking about the basics of financial literacy in terms of needs and wants and those things, because I sort of understand, and I sort of hope that given most of you are at university, that you sort of understand the basics. I'll talk you a little bit through, my personal journey of how some of my learnings over time, and how you can put some of the things that you learn at university and some of the habits into practice, and some of the tips that I've taken. I will point out at the very start that I'm not a financial advisor. So, I won't be providing any tips or tricks on investing as such, because I'll be careful of not being able to sort of give advice on those matters. But my advice is quite general. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and I'd be more than happy to discuss them where I can. Obviously, the first thing that I really want to talk about is the fact that money is a taboo topic, right? We often don't discuss it well enough. We don't talk about it openly, even though it's the one thing, it's a critical thing that will make a difference to all our lives, right? Whether you believe that money is a necessity or not, it almost certainly is, for you to be able to do the basic things that you want to do in your life, right? Now, as you're in university, the sort of things that you spend money on are generally quite limited. And as you obviously graduate and as you go to the workforce, those sort of suddenly open up. I know when I was in university, I actually ran a business. I did have some financial strength, but at the end of the day, I used to severely limit how much money I would spend, because I used to live at home and most of my costs were sort of covered. When I sort of left university, I actually migrated to Sydney to take a job in an investment bank. And my life basically fundamentally shifted pretty quickly, because I went from making a small amount of money to suddenly making a decent amount of money, and particular because of the career that I'd chosen. And all the sort of financial habits that I used to try to teach kids in high schools and even to myself sort of went out the window. And I want to talk a little bit about that, which is, often, there are two parts to being financially fit. There is earning, and then there's obviously your asset base and your investments as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I think when you think about money, right, the first thing that you really have to work out is, where do you want to be, right? What's your vision for your life, right? And that will fundamentally make a lot of difference in terms of a couple of things. One, the careers that you actually go around, right? The sort of jobs that you take around, and your aspirations in life. Now, I've got something to share. When I left university, actually, even before university, my inspiration or my aspirations were always to start my own businesses. I've always wanted to become, to run and create enterprises that will create sort of growth and value. And really, my only requirement out of uni was that I wanted to make sure that I could leave and make enough money so that I could actually start my own business. That was really it. And as part of that, effectively, where I ended up doing was, I said, well, if that's what I want to do, well, what are the careers that will pay me enough? And investment banking happened to be one of them. And that's partly why I pursued investment banking. There was no real, obviously I like businesses, but really it was the one thing that would pay me quite a lot of money. And I thought, okay, well, let's just go for that, because that will allow me to achieve my ambitions. So similarly, and really that was what I wanted to do. And so each of you probably have an aspiration that you want to get to. It might be starting your own business, it might be starting a family, it might be running a not-for-profit. And it's really important for you to understand that, because if you don't understand that, you can't really plan around it. And so, I want you to take some time right now and sort of think about, what is that thing that you want to achieve, not in the next 5 years, but where do you want to be in sort of 20 years, right? What's your dream, right? And all of us have different dreams. All of us have different aspirations, and none of our dreams are better than others or worse than others. But where you want to be is critical for you to determine what plan you take. Now, 2 years into investment banking, again, I decided that I wanted to splurge, and I actually bought myself my first BMW. It was a rash move because I thought it was going to be fun. And I ended up, as I drove that car, I realized that actually what I really wanted to do was be able to enjoy that car, right? Not just to be able to drive it. but to be able to enjoy it. And then, of course, to buy many more of those cars because I really like my cars. And then I went to myself, okay, if I want to do that, what do I do? What are the sort of pathways to doing that? And it effectively worked out that if I wanted to go down the banking route, it would take me a good 10 years to be able to buy multiple of those cars, along with all the other things that are materialistic desires that I had. And at that point, I said, you know what, now's the time for me to start my own business, because I was willing to take that risk. I was relatively young. I had no real liabilities associated with myself. And I think that's one of the things that you've got to appreciate as well when you're planning your finances, is age is important. You know, obviously there are a segment of risky and unrisky assets. So obviously the least risky thing that you can do is obviously invest your money in a bank account. At this stage, I think both in New Zealand and in Australia, the returns that you're going to get from investing in a bank account are fairly, low. And so you've really got to consider then whether that sort of makes sense, or whether you want to diversify your investment portfolio and try to get a return. Or, as I said, you can spend, right? So as you leave university, there are things, and I decided that for my personal circumstances at that time, that the first 5 years or 3 years, I didn't really mind not having a capital base, because I could always go back to my career if I needed to, right? So that's why I sort of quit my job in banking and pursued my career in sort of entrepreneurship. Now, I had to budget quite heavily for that, because effectively when you start a business, you actually can't pay yourself, right? So for the first effectively 2-3 years, I effectively got paid very little. And my bank account went from, having a decent amount of money to starting to dwindle down very, very quickly. And I remember one of the pitfalls that I made, and I think this is really, really important, I think, for anyone who's planning to start a business or you're planning to make a big change, is plan it out. I was used to earning quite a lot of money. And so I continued to spend, even though I quit banking, I continued to spend in the way that I thought I was continuing to earn. And very, very simply, I remember talking to my girlfriend, and who's now my wife, and sort of 4 or 5 months in, I actually realized that if I was going to continue to spend the way that I was spending before, I would be out of money in about 2 or 3 months. And effectively what that meant for me was that then, I would have to go back to most likely go back to banking and give up on sort of my dreams. And so what that meant for me was it was a very important realization, because as I said, when I was in banking, I really didn't, everything that we talk about, budgeting, saving, I didn't really have to worry about it, because, it doesn't matter how much money I spent, I seem to always have some left over. But now that I've sort of taken away that key income source, and that was my own choice, right? I'd made that choice. I hadn't then compensated for that with the fact that I should have been more disciplined around my spending. And so one of the sort of things that I started doing, which I found very helpful, was literally keep a tab of how much money I had in the bank. So I've been doing this now for the last 5 or 6 years. I take a sort of snapshot of how much money I have in the bank. I'll take a snapshot of any money that I might put into my investments. And I will, and this is the key though, is I would subtract, the actual allowance, amount of money that I owe to a credit card, for example, at any point in time. And also the money that I might own on my car, for example, because I bought my car at that point on a loan. And it didn't look pretty, but the good news was that once I started doing that, I was then able to actually see whether there was progress I was making. There's a lot of apps that help you do that as well, by the way. There's a business called Pocketbook, for example. There's other businesses where you can do that automatically. I personally choose not to use them myself, but that's just because I don't want people to be able to access my data. But I think it's okay for people to do that, and most of them are very secure. But I just keep it on Excel, right? It's very basic, literally how much money I have every month, and I do track that over time. And what that allows me to do is, as I said, avoid the sort of pitfalls that I had, where I'm not going to run out of money in at a particular point of time. Now, when you're young, you can, as I said, take risks. You shouldn't be too worried, but you always need to make sure that obviously that you can pay your bills. Your lifestyle goes hand in hand, as I said, with your earning potential, and that is important. But obviously what you choose to do and what you don't is important as well. For me, when I was younger, buying a house was really not that important to me. I didn't really care about buying a house, which is, I know, slightly weird. For me, I was all in on my businesses. So if my businesses were going to work, I was going to be a billionaire and I'd be retired by now. Clearly that hasn't happened. So that was really my plan, and I didn't really have a backup plan. Sort of 4 or 5 years into my business, I realized, and my wife, more credit to her, said, look, this is really, we can't be living on hoping that the businesses will work out, because what if they don't? And that's when we started sort of investing in our property. Now, property is an interesting one, and it is almost certainly, New Zealand has sort of different sort of rules to Australia, but one of the things I will point out to anyone, and I'm happy, I don't know if you can show some hands. I don't know if hands showing is available, but I think it might be. But I want you to tell me, if you're really trying to grow your wealth, do you think, no, it's not. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, the question that I've really got for everyone here to think, and I'm happy for you to consider this, is, do you think it's more important for you to grow your wealth through investments, or is it more important you grow through earning, right? So which one do you guys think is more important? Because at the end of the day, and I think everyone has this dream in their head, that you can earn a lot of money and you'll get to wealth. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't work for 2 reasons. The first is that income earning is difficult, right? There are unfortunately limits on how much you can or cannot earn based on free markets. But the most important thing is, and this is something that people should realize, is taxation, right? And in particular, in places like Australia and New Zealand, that the way the taxation is set up is that your tax on investments or your tax on assets is significantly less than the tax that you pay on income. So if you're earning a decent amount of money in Australia or New Zealand, you'll be paying a marginal tax rate of around 39 to 45, 48%. If that money was funneled into an investment, and I know New Zealand is making changes, as I said, I'm not a financial advisor, so I would be very clear on this. Your capital gains tax, for example, in New Zealand is effectively 0, from what I understand. In Australia, it's about half your marginal tax rate. And so keep that in mind, right? So if you're really trying to grow your wealth, and this is literally where I sort of understood, you've got to make sure that you're actually investing where you can, because as that asset base grows up, then it sort of becomes quite relevant. And then, as I said, from a wealth perspective, it does make a huge difference. And I can tell you right now that, obviously from an asset-based perspective, if you get in early, it works. Now, a lot of people ask me, so what do I invest in, and what do I recommend for investment? Unfortunately, the only piece of advice I can give you is diversification, right? You need to have a diversifying portfolio, and that's important. So make sure that you have a diversified portfolio that doesn't take a hit. I'll tell you, in the middle of COVID, there was I sort of went in on the stock market, but I didn't look at it every day. And I think this is also important. If you're investing in risky assets, try not to look at them every day, and try not to get that thrill of the endorphins, because often, sort of speculative trading, and there's lots of research that's shown this, is where the average punter loses most of their money. So being able to hold your nerve is important. I strongly recommend for anyone who's not interested in active investing to invest in ETFs. They're much more diversified and much easier to actually run. And so I do recommend those sort of portfolio strategies as well. I get, asked questions on crypto and NFTs. I'll be the first one to say I've got absolutely no clue about them. But, again, just bear in mind that things like crypto, NFT are very, very risky, right? And they have a lot of volatility. And it's always good to hear stories. And I've got a friend, for example, who made a couple of $100,000 out of an NFT the other day. And I literally remember going, damn it, I should have thought about that. But the reality is that is luck, right? And I asked my friend who made the $100,000 on NFT how much he's lost on the other ones, and he said close to the same amount. So you've got to keep in mind that risky assets, and again, when you read things in the news, make sure that you sort of digest that with some level of semblance, like don't get too carried away with that. Those are sort of my core sort of tips in terms of how to stay financially fit. I can see there's some questions in there. So I've got one question, is how do you cut corners? I found that saving money in one area, money goes from the other area. Look, it's you've got to have a goal, right? So you've got to have a goal. It is difficult, right? And I'm the first one to admit it. Like, if you see a bank balance going above what you thought you would, you're always tempted to go out and spend that extra dollar. You have to be disciplined, right? But fundamentally, again, you've got to know what you're saving for, right? So if you've actually got a goal, then that makes life a lot easier.
Cool. Thanks for that, Dipra. I certainly learned a lot from your discussion. I just had a few quick questions. And then if everybody, if you do have any other questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A portal now, and then upvote the ones, and we can get onto those. One thing that you spoke about was in terms of growing asset base. I wonder, in New Zealand, I think KiwiSaver is a really useful tool for sort of growing your asset base, which is diversified, and you can take advantage of a lot of sort of government tools with that. So my question is, how important do you think it is to sort of be aware of government policies like that and take advantage of them?
100%. It's probably the most important thing, right? And this is difficult, right? So again, you've got to be very clear, and I do absolutely recommend that A, you do a lot of reading, and B, you actually consult a financial advisor on some of these matters. But government policies play a huge role, right? And the two parts are taxation, as I keep coming back to, and the second is I know when KiwiSaver launched, there was matching, right? So you've got free money, right? So for every dollar you put in, the government match. I don't know if that's changed in New Zealand.
It's 50% now.
Fantastic, right?
Yeah,
I mean, think about that, right? For every dollar you put in, and I know there's a limit to it, so I will point out it's obviously not an unlimited amount. But the key with KiwiSaver is that, again, you do want that have to have that nest egg. I will have one point of caution here. Do not count on KiwiSaver to pay for your anytime expenses in the near future, right? Don't rely on KiwiSaver as your only savings buffer. I see a lot of people who go, okay, well, my super fund or my KiwiSaver's got a balance of, I don't know, $20,000. That's really good. That's going to build up over time. That's for you when you retire. And if there's one thing I can guarantee everyone, is that when we retire, a lot more responsibility come on us. The way that the government budgets are, it's highly unlikely that they can keep affording to pay the sort of pensions that we have today. So you do need to think about that. So yes, invest in KiwiSaver and absolutely pursue those policies, but don't count on that to save you on a rainy day. That's not the point. That is there for when you retire, and that is long term. So I don't, I was talking about my assets. I don't even take my super into account. My super is just there, and it's growing. It's a nice pile. And when I get to the age of ripe 65 or 67, I'll get a nice check, but it's not what I'm counting on.
Absolutely, thanks for that. I think we'll turn to some of the questions from the chat now. The top voted one at the moment is, thanks for the tips, Dipra. Can you explain what an ETS is? Beginner investor here. I think we're talking about ETFs, maybe?
Yes, I was talking about ETFs. So that's correct. So ETF is basically an exchange traded fund. So when you invest in the stock market, you can buy particular stocks. So you can buy a singular stock, for example. You could buy Fletcher Building, or you could buy Telecom, which is called Spark, I think now, shows my age. But effectively with those, you're taking a risk that if that company does poorly, for example, let's say you bought all shares in Air New Zealand just before COVID, right? Because you went hard on that. And then suddenly what would happen is, well, Air New Zealand goes through a really difficult time because of COVID. You're left very exposed. What you effectively do with an ETF is you buy a range of stocks, but rather than having to invest, because normally it doesn't make sense for you to form your own ETF unless you have a lot of money, because you won't get, the costs of trading, which are quite high, mean that it's not worth it. So you can basically get exposure to diversification by investing smaller amounts. And there's a lot of providers that do that. So you can do that through, your online trading platforms. You can, and there's a lot of businesses. I think Sharesies probably allows that in New Zealand. I know here we have StockSpot and others as well. But effectively, it means that you're investing in an asset class without having to diversify it yourself. It means it's just basically smart investing.
Awesome, thanks for that. Some of the other questions out here are asking for some resources. So one of them, you mentioned considering where you want to be in 20 years. Are there any vision, life plan, tools or resources that you have found helpful? And another question asked for some financial literacy resources. On the financial literacy resources, I think from sort of the SavY side, when we make workshops for schools, we find that anything on sorted is a really good tool for the basics. But if you had anything you want to add, Dipra, particularly around the vision.
I was going to just plug SavY, right? So SavY is
Yeah.
the best place for resources. I mean, I'd be remiss not to do that. So look, there's a lot of resources out there. I think so. The only, again, word of advice I have on resources is just be careful where those resources are and if there's any vested interest in those. So one of the things that we are very, very proud of in SavY is that while we get some money from BNZ, we never promote any products. So often you'll see a lot of podcasts, blogs from people that are basically going to sell their product, right? And so just be sort of aware of that. I still remember, so I started SavY because there was a business called Hanover Bridgecorp Finance, which were basically what they call debenture lenders that lend to property developers. And I remember they used to do a lot of like seminars and stuff, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we'll educate you. And unfortunately, their really aim was to get you to put money into their stuff, and their money was not safe. So again, I agree with Liam that, obviously sorted is great. That's independent. It's got no connection with industry, which is good. So there's no sort of ulterior motives. SavY's got a lot of resources for more basic stuff, especially for school students. So I do highly recommend that as well. In terms of vision and life sources, look, it's interesting. I did a course once for Dale Carnegie, which was good and sort of helped me in my ability, but not particularly. The thing that sort of drives me is sort of basic stuff. I don't think you need to overthink vision. I think too many people try to overcomplicate it and monetize it. I think it's literally about you thinking when you go to sleep, where do I want to be, right? What do I want to have? Right. And for me, as I said, the two things that I really wanted to do is, one, I wanted to be financially independent. I didn't want to be wealthy. I'm not going to apologize for that. So I absolutely want to have, I'm competitive. So I wanted to make a lot of money. And so I wanted to be able to buy whatever I wanted. And B, I wanted to have fun doing it. Right. That's literally my vision. Right. And then the question was, okay, how do I get there? And for some of you, it's the basics, right? Don't overcomplicate it. Like, don't try to figure out in 20 years what job you're going to have, blah, blah, blah. Like don't overcomplicate the whole thing, because that's scary. Just go like, okay, where do I want to be? It might be, as I said, I want to have a family. I want to be able to go travel twice a year. It's quite interesting. My wife's vision is very different. My wife's vision is quite simple. She wants a mortgage-free house. It's not that, very possible. And she wants to be able to travel twice a year, right? That's her vision. And obviously we've got kids and we've got a kid, and she wants to make sure that we can give the kid, what they want, but within limits. But she doesn't care whether I'm a billionaire or a multimillionaire or whatever. It's irrelevant to her. That's her vision. And all of you have a vision like that, and you've just got to figure out what that is. And if you haven't figured it out, which you almost certainly may not, it's okay as well. You work it out in your first couple of years in your career.
Awesome, thanks for that, Dipra. On a related note, one of the questions here, some of us might have a bit of explaining to do with parents when leaving a safe, well-paid job, especially if they've supported us through uni. Was this an issue for you, and any advice on the approach?
Yeah, it's an issue for anyone, right? So again, it'd be, look, yes, the short answer is yes. My father didn't quite understand why I would leave a highly paid, somewhat respected. I wouldn't go too much into the respect pieces, but some well-credentialed job to go out and start something spiky. And literally, we were trying to invent something that wasn't invented, right? Like, it wasn't like we were trying to do something that sort of made sense. It was something bloody crazy. And yes, I remember my father strongly advising me not to, and he actually literally said to me, why don't you go to an MBA, in Stanford or Harvard instead, and he'll consider funding it. And I was like, oh, that's attractive, but that's really not the point. You've got to have conviction to be able to do that. I think you've really got to have conviction. I think there's, pretty much all my friends thought I was a little bit batshit crazy when I quit. I think that's fine, right? And you've got to have that inner conviction. I think the other thing is obviously you need support. So you do need support. So you need to have. So my wife, or my girlfriend at that time, was very, very supportive. I think she was very, very clear that she was happy. She did say, she's not going to stick around for 20 years if I couldn't afford to pay. She literally said to me, if we can't afford to pay for my dinners, then in 20 years' time, then there's a problem, which I was fine with. So I said, yeah, that's fine. So that was the sort of her tolerance, but she was happy to support me. Look, happiness was the key thing for me. And I think my parents also understood that. I was a bit grumpy when I was in banking. I had to work some ridiculous hours and wasn't really working out. So I think they saw that. But my advice is have conviction, show them the plan, right? Be vulnerable. I think often when you start stuff, it is hard to be vulnerable because you're trying to be successful and you're trying to show a sort of big, hairy vision. Share that with them. I'm still a bit risk averse on that with my parents in particular. I don't like to be like, yeah, this is going to be worth $1 billion or something like that if I can avoid it, because I'm worried that I might not achieve that. So, but you've got to have conviction and you've got to take it through it. Look, most parents just want you to be happy, right? So fundamentally, and ideally, and my dad also did say this, try not to come back to him for money. And I said, yeah, that won't be a problem. So I had a plan, and that was key.
Awesome. Next one on the thing is, would you recommend platforms like Hatch, Invest Now, and Sharesies? For me personally, I think it's quite interesting running workshops with SavY going into sort of year 11 classrooms, and we've got kids who use Sharesies and stuff. So it's really lowered the barrier to investing in the share market, and I personally would, but I think it's important to look at the different fees. What are your thoughts, Dipra?
Look, what you use to invest in doesn't matter, right? Whether you use Hatch, whether you use ASB Bank or BNZ, or whether you use E-Trade, or it's irrelevant, right? So the key is fees, as Liam's pointed out. So there are fees. If there's only one thing that I have a word of caution on platforms, and I think the only thing is they're trying to gamify, trying to make it fun, and that's important. But keep in mind that it's real money with real consequences, right? So that's the only thing that I probably have as a word of advice is, yes, cool UI, UX is great, right? And that's awesome. And this is where I said, if you really want to trade, right? If you really want to go in the stock market, the word of advice I got, my dad used to be a stockbroker actually. And I remember telling him I wanted to do stock trading. And he said, oh, don't be silly. It's like throwing a dart somewhere and hoping it lands, right? And he said, look, before you go in, create a virtual portfolio, right? Create a virtual portfolio and just see whether you can, see how you feel, right? See how that feels when the stock goes down, goes up, see whether you can hold that loss, right? The biggest problem that most of us have is we're loss averse, right? And what I mean by that is when things start going down, we panic, right? And if you do that, with share trading, it almost certainly will burn you more often than not. There are sometimes you should get out, by the way, so I also want to be very clear on that. But yeah, so the only thing I have with things like Sharesies and things is I think they're great platforms. They've really lowered the cost of entry. Read the PDS, make sure that your funds are safe, make sure that they have, the only other risk there is obviously if their funds get caught up and they go broke. But I think based on what I understand, they keep most of their stuff in segregated policies, but do read that, absolutely read that, because that's critical. And then don't treat it like a game, because unless you literally want to treat it like a game. So you say, okay, look, I've got $1,000. I don't care whether I lose it or gain it. It's fine. But just be cautious of that piece, because I have seen friends in particular who treat it like a game and then get really upset when they lose the game and don't realize that that's real money with real consequences.
Next question. A lot of things around long-term financial planning is down to daily habits. Do you have any recommendations in terms of tracking weekly spend or deciding when to spend and when to save /invest?
Yeah, look, I think there is of course sort of daily habit, daily tracking, as I said, can be quite difficult. But I think I have a plan, for example. I do have this. I have what I would call, so I split my budgets. And again, SavY is very good at this. There'll be the ones that are what I would call non-discretionary. So that's stuff like your rent. There'll be things like your electricity bills. There'll be things like your car repayments. That's non-discretionary, right? And then you'll have your income, and then you'll have what's left, And then you'll say, okay, I want to save, I don't know, $1,000 a month or $500 a month. And then whatever that remainder is, you should take that divided by your daily, the number of days, ideally take 10% off, and then go, well, that's the amount I can spend, right? And then you can say, look, in a normal day, I'll spend half of that on food. Or I'll spend, for me, I've got a budget, say $50 a day or $100 a day that I can spend on, that's not related to my, as I said, discretionary spend or non-discretionary spend. So I've got fairly high non-discretionary spend. So I've got mortgages and things like that. But so that means that affects how much I can spend. So that means when I go out and see something for $200, I think twice, right? But it is important. It is very important, at least in your head, right, for you to work out what that threshold is, right? So I can spend $20 or $30 and I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to my life. But if I spend $200, it means that for the next 10 days, I've got to think about making some adjustments.
Just one thing to add from me is that I think when you're deciding what to cut, it's important to think about the things that you enjoy and make sure that you're mindful of that and not potentially cutting that. So if you enjoy having a coffee every day, then put that into the budget. And if it is something that you enjoy, you shouldn't have to suffer when you're budgeting. The next question there, thanks for the talk, Dipra. I was wondering, for those with a work income, what proportion of income would you recommend somebody put into investing, or what proportion of our money should be from investing versus income?
Look, it really depends on how much you earn, right? I think you've got to be pretty, again, I don't want to be, it's not rocket science, right? So when you first start off working, right? So the reality is most people get paid relatively, and I think New Zealand in particular is still a relatively low wage country. So the reality is, I could tell you should save 50%, you won't be able to do that, right? It's just not possible today with the cost of living. So I'd be careful about setting an arbitrary number, right? I don't want to do that, because that's going to create unnecessary stress for yourselves that doesn't make any sense. Just be realistic, right? So say, okay, well, again, it comes down to your lifestyle, right? Now, I do recommend you save at least something, right? So you've got to find a way, but I know that's difficult as well, especially for your first couple of years of your career. And that's okay. You can literally say that, and this was the first couple of years, you go, okay, you know what? I'm okay not to save a lot, right? But I have a rainy fund away for a little bit. So I would, if I can, I would say 10% is a good benchmark where you can. But, fundamentally, there is no right or wrong. I will say this, that as you earn more money, your percentage should go up, right? So where possible, and this is where, especially as you go through your career, you'll get some fairly large pay rises. Don't fall into the trap. And I used to see this in banking. We used to call us, there's a lot of what they call rich poor, which is you sort of earn a lot of money, but because you've got massive commitments, you're basically still poor. And you want to avoid that if you can.
Awesome. I think we're now on to our last question, which is sort of around taxation. So you have mentioned that investments are not taxed and income is. PIE investments and stock investments are still heavily taxed, only the property market isn't. However, the current property market is going crazy. It is too expensive to buy until we are 45. I think the question is sort of potentially about the disconnect between the taxation on property and taxation on the rest of the market. One thing that I might note is that stock investments and other PIE investments are still taxed just on the dividends, so on the income generated. And they have the same no capital gains tax in New Zealand on the capital gain there. Dipra, any thoughts?
No, not really. I'm not a tax expert. So as I said, from my understanding, and I'll be very clear, I thought there's no capital gains tax in New Zealand. So that was sort of my point that I was making, is that, if you made $10 out of, let's say you invested for $1 in a share today and it became $10, from my understanding, unless you do that as your job, so unless that's literally your work, you don't get taxed on it. But if I'm wrong, then I stand corrected. Look, on property, it's a very hot political question, so I'll stay out of that. So, I think but the reality, and again, in terms of property affordability, I have empathy for everyone here. I think realistically, if it's very difficult to get a property. I have a lot of empathy for people here. And even in Australia, but Australia, at least the income levels are okay. So especially if you double income, but yeah, New Zealand, I do agree it's a bit silly, but that's something that's well out of my jurisdiction.
And for anybody who is interested in sort of the tax rates and anything in that, the IRD website's quite a good place to go, and it has a lot of good resources there. Awesome. And Dipra, is there any final piece of advice from you?
Not really. I mean, guys, just enjoy your life. I think that's the key. I think one of the things that I would say is that, planning in particular and understanding is key to having success. Money is one of those things that causes a lot of stress for everyone, right? It is. That's why I said it's a taboo topic, but we've got to deal with it openly. You need to have conversations. So one thing I didn't cover, and I think it is important, is obviously in a relationship, as you grow and with your families, it's important for you to have open conversations about that, right? And to be like-minded on that, because that can be severe, causes for financial stress and issues. So just make sure you're open. Talk about it more openly, right? Don't be afraid. Ask people for advice, right? But most of all, I think you guys are on a young, you're young, you've got a long way ahead. So, just stick at it. And obviously, if you need questions or you have, concerns, then there's lots of resources out there. SavY is obviously one of them, and there's lots of others as well. So happy to see if we can help in any way.
Yeah, I'll just plug our Facebook and Instagram and everything. So like us on Facebook with SavY New Zealand, same on Instagram as well. Awesome. But thanks everybody for their questions, attention and participation. It has been our pleasure to discuss getting financially fit personal finance habits for success with you today. The Connect and Develop series brings you professional development talks covering topics designed to help you adapt and understand the changing world of work. Today was talk 2 of the series and 3 remain. If you like today's topic and want to join us for the remaining talks or invite fellow students or alumni, please visit auckland.ac.nz/connect and develop, or just forward the link. Thanks again for joining us today. We hope to see you at one of the other talks.